and stuff as people are talking?
Oh, how do you do that?
Hello, and welcome to the Community Conversations hosted by USITT. This new monthly conversation focuses on BIPOC professionals in the industry, their careers, and what inspires them. This month, we are focusing on professionals in the Latinx community. My name is Jesse Portillo. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm a lighting designer and I am an assistant professor at Cal Poly Pomona. I would like to welcome my guests that are joining me and ask everyone to introduce themselves. Would you mind going first, Tanya?
Hi, yes. I'm Tanya Oriana. I'm a set designer based in Los Angeles, but I do a lot of work in San Francisco as well. So I'm a California designer, but I'm currently calling in from Dallas.
Oh. Great. Regina.
Hi, my name is Regina Garcia. I'm a scenic designer. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am an associate professor and head of scenic design at DePaul, the theater school, and I'm calling in from Chicago.
And Alejo.
Hi, my name is Alejo Vietti. I am a costume designer. I am from Argentina and based in New York City, and I'm calling from New York City, and he, him, his.
Hey.
And I'm she, her, hers, which I didn't say.
Thank you. I'd like to start our conversation with a brief discussion about terminology. In the last few years, we've seen the word Latinx be used more and more frequently. And more recently, we have also seen some pushback on that term and some suggestions about other terminology. So why do we use the term Latinx?
I think originally, if I may, I'll respond first. Originally, we were looking for a terminology or a word that would be more inclusive, and we found that the ungendering of the Spanish was first and foremost what needed to happen. So Latinx came up. From that point onward, of course, there's been several conversations, and I'll let my colleagues talk about that in different circles of about other ways that perhaps we can be more inclusive and really speak to the diversity of the community at large.
Yeah, I've seen a version that's growing in popularity, Latina, with an E at the end. And I think it's coming about because translating, using the E as an alternative to A or O flows a little better in Spanish. But I think right now, I definitely, either the E or the X is something I support. And I think it's really important and exciting that we're having the conversation of how our language can be inclusive.
And changed, right?
And changed, yes.
I have a little problem with Latinx, as Tanya and Regina know we talk about that. And my biggest problem is like the term, it's an anglicized version of a Spanish word. So I think we're trying to solve a semantic problem with a semantic problem. Adding the X is not really applicable in Spanish languages or in Latin language, either Spanish or Portuguese. It's kind of hard to pronounce. So there's a room, I started to investigate where this comes from, and I read that it was originally introduced in 2004 through academia in Puerto Rico, which makes sense because it's a place that it's very bilingual. But I also will put up in the private chat, and then Jesse, you can spread it. A poll that has been done by Pew. That it was done late last year, and it came out recently in August, that says that only 3% of Latin Americans in the US and have use, or they define themselves in Latinx, and among that percentage is definitely younger people. Because it's a word that comes especially in academia. It was introduced, I think, especially after that it came out in 2004. It was introduced through Ivy schools, like Yale and University of Florida, etc. was introduced. So I think out of like the 17%, 18% of like population of the US that is Latino, there are people, there's like a big percentage, it's 70-something% that haven't even heard this word before. So I think it still has its problems. I mean, like the Real Academia Española has not recognized the word and it's very against it. So I agree with Tanya and with Regina, all for inclusivity, but I think this specific word has a few challenges. And to me, the biggest one is the one that it's anglicizing a word that is originally in Spanish.
So we've gone with the word Latinx for this discussion because it currently seems to be the most widely used, but we are certainly aware that there is an ongoing discourse about what the best terminology is, but we've gone with Latinx because it seems to be the most widely understood of the options that are available. So thank you all for your input on that. I'd like to ask each of you to share some details about your life and your professional journey. What drew you into theater in the first place? And are there any highlights that led you to where you are now? What type of productions do you tend to work on? What inspires you? And Tanya, do you mind starting us off?
Sure. I guess I'll start with what drew me into theater. I had kind of an interesting route where I was really interested in theater for a long time without knowing that I was interested and that it was a possible career path. But actually in fourth grade, I grew up in San Francisco, and the SF Opera used to go to elementary schools and offer, you could write an essay and get tickets to the opera, and 8 students would get tickets. And I won a pair of tickets, and it's the first time I went. And I have such a clear memory of like the curtain going up and being like, oh my God, this is my happy place. But I don't think I saw it as a career until I got to college, just because I didn't have anyone in my life that art was how you made a living, and that art was actually something you would go to college for. So after that, I remember I would go to a lot of theater, and whenever I had a chance, I would ask my parents for tickets to like a show that was in town. And then I met set designers in undergrad, and it was like a moment, like I had no idea that someone could actually like get paid to do this for a living. And I think that's just like, even if you've seen something, like meeting people that are doing that in their lives and doing that professionally, like kind of changes your reality if you're exposed to that.
Alejo, do you want to tell us a little bit about your starts in theater?
A little bit like Tanya, I grew up kind of loving the arts. I grew up in a house that my parents, even though they were not related to the arts, were like big fans of it, and they always inculcated the arts to my sister and I always loved it. But I guess when I think now, I kind of self-censor myself. Growing up in Argentina, I always thought like I couldn't make a living being a designer, that it was more like a hobby. That's why I went to law school in Argentina after I finished high school. And like 4.5 years into it, my father asked me if I was happy, and I say no. He told me like I should quit and I should start doing what I wanted. And the next day I enrolled myself in design school. And then after I finished, I just came with my family for vacations here, and I told them I'm not going back. So after 10 days, they all went back, and I stayed here without money, without paperwork, without knowing anyone. I guess, when I look back, it was kind of crazy. And I picked up a phone book, and I did call people that I admire. I've seen their work either on the movies or on theater when I came here. And that's how I got my first job. There was no internet back then, so I just picked up the phone book and I called them, as I said, and Roth gave me my first job, and then only for 2 weeks, and then she recommended me to someone, and then that's how I started my career and how I developed my career. So the world of assistant and being an associate was like the best school I could have asked for.
And Regina.
Well, hello. I think, my parents have always been very involved in the arts in Puerto Rico. At the time when it was time to go to college, and my parents, made it very clear that I had no other choice, that it was their responsibility to put me through college, especially as their first child. I think it was very clear for my parents that, or their hope, that I could find a way to earn a living in what I love to do, but they really wanted me to have a well-rounded education. So I did go to a liberal arts school that was strong in the arts, but it was definitely not a degree in theater. Once I was in the United States and I was able to, let's say, see the opportunities, see myself in the field, especially through several internships after graduation, I just really didn't know where to go. One of the few theater companies, Hispanic, Latino theater companies in New York at the time, Pregones Theater, were kind enough to give me my first gig as an usher in the Bronx. And slowly but surely, observing their practice and their community engagement, it just became really clear. I mean, I knew that theater was going to be important to me, but I just wasn't ready, I guess, to commit. I didn't understand the path or that journey clearly. So it took a couple of years of being in residence with Pregones, or being an usher, being an assistant and whatever they needed. And I just saw myself in that world very clearly. And they were the ones who said, if you want to do this, you need to go back to school. So I did go back and earn my MFA, stayed in New York. And slowly but surely, and of course it takes a village, several directors outside of New York. I think those of you that live in New York know that it's a particular type of hustle and a life. But I think it took a couple of other colleagues outside of the city to say, hey, come over to New Jersey, come over to St. Louis. Let's play, and they knew that I was just starting and that I did not have a background in theater, but they were willing to play and willing to collaborate. And to this day, I'm very grateful for those early opportunities. And I'm just, I guess, grateful to this day that I just, took the leap.
So I have a follow-up question. Tanya, previously you talked about sort of being pigeonholed or labeled in terms of the style of your work, and some discoveries that you made while in grad school. So I'd like to go back around and ask everyone to tell us what sort of work are you doing? You're working, commercially or in regional theater, and what type of work do you tend to excel at, or what type of designer have you been labeled? And what do you enjoy doing? Anywhere you want to go with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think early in my development, people didn't understand exactly how to guide me in the aesthetic and the process that I was showing. And so I kept being told that I was different and that my work looked different and experimental. And I didn't understand at the time, because I didn't feel that I was attempting to be experimental. I was just attempting to express how I interpreted the play. And so I was always very confused about it. And I think at some point I was able to identify that, because I grew up first generation in the United States. Both my parents are from El Salvador. I grew up in a the Mission District of San Francisco, which is a predominantly Latinx neighborhood. Really beautiful neighborhood with a lot of different generations of Latinx communities coming during different decades. And so I was coming from a perspective, like a cultural perspective of being Salvadoran, US American. And I think people didn't understand that I just didn't have the same nostalgia for the aesthetics in theater. And, even though I think as designers, we have a lot of dexterity and, whatever the play requires, whether it's realism or abstraction, it's important to still find what your inherent voice is and what your inherent aesthetic is, and then you do your version of those things. So early in my career, I don't think people knew how to guide me in that process. I did get a lot more guidance in my graduate program. So I think being labeled as different, I realize now that it was because there is a standard of what theater is supposed to look like. And now I think we're moving into a place where we can celebrate like a spectrum of voices, but that's sort of new, I think.
So what kind of work do you do now? What sort of, are you working regionally, and are you plays, musicals, and what excites you the most?
I definitely do a lot of plays. I really like plays that I think question the norm and are asking people to shift their perspective. I love immersive work because I think that's a fun way to just immediately shift your perspective when you put your body through it. I love it all, right? But and I think because of my early time, I still have a great love of opera, even though that's a difficult field to break into. And I'm just starting a regional career. I'm 3 years out of grad school, so like I've started getting regional credits, but it's definitely a place I'm growing into. And I'm a new work person. I love new work.
Thank you. Alejo, you've got some substantial career highlights, right? So multiple Broadway productions. What type of work do you enjoy doing? What type of work do you tend to do a lot of? Have you found that you've been pigeonholed or labeled as a certain type of designer?
That's a good question. I will try to, I will try to find out as I answer. I do tend to enjoy very much the work that I do with people. I really like doing it. I realize the more I work that you develop these relationships they're fruitful at a human level and they're fruitful on a professional level. And I always feel like the best work is done when, every person in the team, tells the same story, when you're all on the same path and you all follow like that vision that the director has, whether it's an opera, whether it's a musical, whether it's a play. I tend to do a lot of plays and musicals. My Broadway credits are actually all musicals, all big musicals. And I really love it. Enjoy it. It's a different thing to do each one of them. In terms of pigeonholing, I don't know, because it's maybe something that is a perception that I actually may not know what it is. I feel like people may pigeonhole it without you even knowing. Probably they think that I'm more of a musical designer, and I really love doing theater. I do have to say that I do enjoy the most doing period shows, because they're the ones that, like you can investigate and get really deep into it. Doing contemporary shows is very challenging. As I always say, everybody dresses in contemporary clothes, so everybody feels therefore an authority. So it's really, really hard. People take them for granted, but it's really, really hard to put together contemporary show, especially if it's a small, because it's just, even though, it has to be one look and it has to be very specific. But I really love, like doing all kinds of work. I wish I would be, my thing was my generation was more about assimilation, Jesse. So I feel like I find myself doing a lot of projects that are kind of either, US centric or, European centric. I wish I could do more Latin American stories on stage. My path didn't take me through that. Right now I'm starting to be called to do more mainstream stuff that is, tells Latin American stories. But I found like great gratification doing that. I feel like, it's talking about like something that involves me and my roots. So I really enjoy doing that.
Great, thank you. Regina.
Oh my gosh. Well, I think for me, if I were to say that I'm being pigeonholed into anything, I would say that I do a lot of unit sets with minor shifts. I find joy in doing this work. I find joy in looking at other kinds of details that I can do and use to make things interesting, a little bit more, to poke at the play or to poke at the audience in interesting ways. Because I am originally a painter and sculptor, a visual artist, I think I've always been very opinionated when it comes to aesthetics. With that said, I also know that we all have a journey and a life, and that we make changes and new things reveal themselves to us as we continue to practice and get older and learn things about ourselves and about the kinds of stories we want to tell. So I will say that I appreciate and I highly value the opportunities where I can bring myself in, like some of my colleagues say, everything that has to do with me and my culture, my background, my experience, and also, let's say, warts and all, like they say. And I like to work in a group setting where we're constantly vetting ideas and also challenging each other and unpacking questions about these stories. So for me, more than any project, I value the process. I value the people that are sitting across from me at the table. Because I was a visual artist, I have never had an issue with starting the process without team members or a director. As I've gotten older, I value that more. So I've learned, and I'm talking about when I started, when I was very young to now, I've learned to make space and create pauses within my process to allow more ideas to come in, other questions, to make that process even more robust and thorough. But as a lot of directors will tell you, the directors who I work with, I come at the first meeting with multiple little models or little sculptures and ready to play with a hot glue gun. And those moments where we are at the table are, I think, the highlight and why I've chosen this life. Other than that, I want to share. I agree with Alejo talking about and Tanya. I think we've all been in residence, or we have a particular group of artists that we are, growing up or growing old with, and they're our family, our chosen theater family. And I will say that my chosen family knows when to push and when to poke, and when to celebrate. One year, I actually made the conscious decision as a freelancer to only participate or take contracts with people that I either loved or respected. It was a hard year because it was a year of, saying goodbye to the people I loved. So every opening was kind of painful. While we celebrated, I was like, I'm not going to see you. But I think, like Alejo, I enjoy this part of my life now, being able to choose playtime and when they come into the year and that calendar. I don't know. Did I answer all your questions? I think there was one more about regional theater, maybe. Like I said earlier, it just takes one person to invite you over that takes a chance, that sees themselves perhaps in your aesthetic, your inquiry process of inquiry. So to this day, I'm grateful to Ron Himes at the St. Louis Black Rep, of course, Rosalba and Alban at Pregones, Bill Rausch and Chris Acebo at Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and some of the folks in Arizona and other cities, Denver, the director, James Vasquez, who actually said, come over, I see something there, let's try it, let's play. And from there, it kind of, things just changed, and I'm very grateful to each of and every one of those opportunities.
Thank you. So Regina, you were just talking a lot about people working together and forming communities, and I think in the last few months, the BIPOC population in theater has formed new communities in new ways and strengthened existing communities. And in the last few months with that, there has been a lot of conversation about the inequities within the structures of the American professional theater. And I'm gonna ask everyone if you have any thoughts on how those inequities have either affected the overall Latinx community, or if if you've experienced something personal that you're willing to share. Alejo, do you mind starting us?
Sure. I mean, it's a loaded question, but I think it's, if anything that I think is positive with this pandemic that we're going through, was this reckoning of the American theater, that it all started or was triggered by the assassination of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement. And we see white American theater. And there's a lot of groups that have been created. And in respect specifically with the Latinx arts community in theater, I think that to answer your question, it's the fact that they are not invited as they should on mainstream theater speaks tons about it. When you think about that, the Latino or the Latinx community in the U.S. represents 18% of the population, according to the upcoming results of the 2020 census. You don't have that representation, not even close to that representation in mainstream theater. And if Broadway was to be open right now, if opera was to be open right now with the shows that were playing when the pandemic started and Broadway shut down, there would be only one Latinx designer representing every field: sets, costumes, lights, sounds, projection on Broadway. And that speaks a lot about the situation, because that's not an anomaly, that's the norm. That's the norm. That designer, by the way, is the great Ricardo Hernandez for the sets of Jagged Little Pill. So things need to change. Things need to change for all minorities that need to be represented. And my fear is that more people need to be invited to the table. It's not that we're going to use the 5, 10, 20 BIPOC top designers and we're going to keep using them over and over. The idea is to start opening doors to newer, to younger, to fresher voices that has not been somehow contaminated. What I'm trying to say is like the same thing I said before. I am from a generation of assimilation. So this process, I'm going through my own journey now, trying to peel off all these layers that I realized that I have built up during these last 23 years, trying to peel off all these defenses, all these mechanisms of defense that I have built up in this armor. So I think it's a communal effort to try to change the situation. I hate the idea of oftentimes Latinx theater be relegated to small specific companies that work in New York and an off-Broadway situation. I hate that. I think we need to be invited, and by we, I mean every single Latinx artist, that works in this field, to be invited to play mainstream and not to be cliche again, not to be pigeonholed in the misrepresentation of what Latino people should look on stage or what they should be, and not hire us because of our ethnicity, but hire us because of what we can bring to the project. It's not about checking a box. That we need to make clear as well.
Great, thank you. Yeah, there is a lot in there, Alejo, and so we'll go into
personal experiences that you asked. That I'm sure. Sorry to interrupt. That we all went through. Constant microaggressions. Constant, in all these years I've been here, I've been told time and time again, oh, you don't look Latino. There's this very strange. There's this illusion trapping the idea that Latinos have a specific appearance. And that's mostly based on racial markers. And that's completely false. They believe that Latinx has a specific racial trait. Is a fabricated, somehow oversimplified stereotype, which I think ultimately conditions and limits the Latinx population. Because if you think about it, most Latinos do not identify with a particular race because we can be Black, white, indigenous, Asian, or mixed. So that is something that we need to work on it. You know what I mean? It's stop telling us that we don't look Latinos. We don't need to look like anything else but what we look like. And at the same time, make fun of our accents, or tell us, oh, you don't understand because you're not American. So it's a lot, things that you go through, and then sometimes you get used to it and you just let it go and move on with it.
Great, thank you. Regina.
Well, should I comment?
Sure.
I don't know. I think I agree with what Alejo was saying. I think in terms of, and my experience is very similar. That when I graduated with my degree, there were certain, I think, expectations of what my work needed to be or look like to be able to be successful in New York City. I think it took me many years to figure it out and unpack it and make sense of it and wrap it back up in my let's say my visual artist banner and find the strength within it. It also did not help that I was, of course, like what Alejo was saying, surrounded by microaggressions about what kinds of work I could and could not handle. I will say that in my regional travels, when I started, once the invitation came and I started moving out towards west or westward bound, I would call theaters and say, hey, I'm in town. I would love to have coffee. I've read about your programming and I believe in your programming. Can I meet with you and show you my portfolio? And those initial phone calls, the response, and I'm glad that they took my call, but the response was, we're not doing a Latino show this year, so we don't need you. Thank you for calling. And that was the first one. And then, of course, the other conversation at the time was how certain theaters, I guess, prioritize the hiring of male designers versus female. And I think when I graduated, there was still just a handful of women designers. So I was part of those 10 years of trying to survive and kind of chipping away and responding and trying to present myself in a way that was slightly less gendered, I guess. So those were challenging years and a challenging early life in this field. And I can still see the pieces. We were just talking about it yesterday at my university, and I think a lot of professors can speak to that are watching today, that there are still remnants of those practices and the way that we interrogate or look at those portfolios that are, oh, here's a woman, here's a person of color, here is somebody that just arrived to the States, instead of here's a designer that could contribute in new ways to a conversation about this play. or this series within my, programmatic arm at my institution. And it's interesting. It's interesting to see now that we're in the midst of this pause, and everybody keeps calling it a pause. So I will do the same. Or this pause, it's a time to reevaluate, reflect, like Alejo was saying, peel off. I am happy to serve in one of the groups that is looking at some of those oppressive practices, like 10 out of 12s. Yes, I said it. No more 10 out of 12s, because they keep us away from our families. It actually is a gatekeeper in terms of who can be successful in our field. And so I'm putting a lot of my time and my energy within that committee, and of course, La Gente, which we will speak soon. But it's been an interesting couple of decades just to see it kind of hitting a mark and then kind of rotating around and reappearing with new masks and with different language, but it's still the same. So I'm hoping that we can reconnect and evaluate together and rebuild, so that we can make the work that we want to make, and also see ourselves in the American theater, clearly in the American theater.
All right, thank you. Tanya.
Yeah, I mean, I love everything that Regina and Alejo are saying. So I'll definitely reiterate the microaggressions is a big part of it. And I think for me, what can be hard about the microaggressions is the psychology of it, of never knowing like where it's, like, am I crazy or is that person talking down to me? And there's like a sixth sense you have when someone is talking to you as an artist they respect and when they don't, and you just know. And so I think the weight of that can be really heavy, especially when you're in spaces, all white spaces, and you're the only person of color, it feels like, in the building. So I think that's definitely part of it. And when I think about like what this has done to the Latinx community as a whole, I always think about generations and how who has been lost. Like who we're fixing the future, but whose voices were never developed? Who are the, how many Latinx female set designers 2 generations ago did I not have to look up to when I was developing, because they weren't developed, and we'll never get those people back. Those are just a bunch of voices, beautiful voices that were not part of the theater scene the way they should have been. So I think there's, I'm excited that we're moving forward, and, upset about the people that didn't get a chance to develop.
Thank you all for being willing to go into that question that I don't mean it to be loaded, right? That's not the intention, but it sort of inherently is. And I would say that you have all said multiple things that resonate with me personally, in different times and in places that I've lived and worked. So we have a question from David DeCarolis. Hi, David. Should shows about a specific race, ethnicity, or community only be designed by members of that group? He's currently working on Zoot Suit in a costume class, and he's been asking himself this question. So Alejo, do you want to weigh in?
Oh, okay. I'll go first. I think this question, it doesn't have like exclusive answer. I think there are specific shows that, yes, I think they need to be addressed by that specific group. Especially, I think, like African American theater. I think that they have a voice and they have a story to show that is very powerful. And also the fact that, that they have been somehow ignored. How many times, we've seen things that even have been, like Black stories being created by like white people and told by white people. And the biggest example of that is something like Porgy and Bess, right? So I think it's enough with that. I think we have seen enough versions of that. I think we need to let, the people who are we telling the story about tell those stories. Having said that, I think there are many other cases that a story is not so focused and so specific, and is, let's say, somehow multiracial, or is like has different levels of ethnicity, that you definitely, I think that you definitely have to include the voices that represent that story, but not exclusively. I think that it could be a variety. I think, like, to me, to my book, in my book, an Asian designer could participate without a problem telling a Latin American story. But I will hope that there's also a Latin American story, a Latin American person helping to tell that story. So I don't think it needs to be inclusive, because again, what we may risk is the pigeonholing again. So that means that then Latin American designers only can participate in Latin American stories, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's not the case. But I think those are like parallel roads. The equity road, that is really far from achieving, far, 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 and the fact that we need to include voices that represent the story that we are telling. I think they're two different roads, but they have parallel, and I think they're both very important, because we've seen time and time again, whether it's in the mainstream television or whether it's on the movie screen or on the stage, all the time, the stories that are very specific about a group, and they have no voices representing that group off stage. And that is a big mistake, because those voices exist and they need to participate. And also, the last thing I want to say about this is, like, the other thing that really annoys me about this is when designers, let's say we're telling a story about a specific group, and then it's designed by white designers, and those designers hire people of color that have the ethnicity of the race of the story that is being told. And those people are used not only as associates, but also as consultants. So basically, I think that there's a huge hypocrisy in that. Is you're hiring that person, you're taking the credit, and then you're using that voice in order to give you feedback and to give you, like, assistance in helping tell the story in a correct way. And I think should not be done or practiced anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Regina or Tanya? Yeah.
I would like to say something, because in this case, I think it's part of a class project in particular, and I think when it comes to your training, I think the professor is hoping that this experience provides a certain amount of information and provides you with very specific tools, perhaps prompt some real empathy and curiosity about other cultures, so that you understand that one experience is not the same as another. Perhaps one garment is not worn the same way by different members of a particular community, or the experience of life in the 30s or 40s is not going to be the same for this community and this community. New York to LA, New York, London, New York, Madrid. So I think they're giving you the assignment so that it provides a certain amount of gives you the experience and the practice of delving deeper into a culture with respect, with appreciation for those differences, and so that you have that tool in your belt, right? We want empathetic, committed citizens as designers moving forward, right? So as I think that you should move forward with the class assignment, because it is going to provide an interesting learning experience, and also just give you some real practice on how you need to address each project, right? Curiosity, empathy, appreciation. You're an anthropologist, right? You're a humanist. So I think it's a good choice, and you should give it 100%.
Yeah, and I would also add in, more design courses should be including work like Zoot Suit at all levels of education. And as an educator myself, right, I've had to constantly challenge myself and re-examine what I'm doing and the texts that we're studying and designing to make sure that I'm not getting stagnant, right, and that the students are being exposed to new things. Because when I was in school, right, I never had a design project for a show like Zoot Suit. So I think there's a lot of value in that assignment. Tanya, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I mean, I think I personally feel that teams should be diverse, and just similar to what Alejo said, right now what we're not seeing is that the teams are diverse, and that so if a project is about a specific community, I think the majority of the people that are creating that project should be from that community, but not everyone. Because I mean, as a theater maker, I take a great responsibility in the playwright story, and that someone is lending me their story and I'm embodying it and then expressing it. I'm always very aware that this is someone's story that they're sharing with the world, and that they're sharing with me and allowing me to make work from. And I think that's an important thing for all of us as theater makers. I love the word that Regina said, that we're all humanist, and that we're trying to learn how to take on other people's stories and to learn from them and to share them and to find ourselves in one another. So I think that's the beautiful part about theater, is that you have a diversity of voices sharing a story and finding themselves and each other in it.
Great, thank you. And thank you for that question, David. We have another question that came in from Steve. Can you all see that? Does the panel consider the very limitations of Broadway centralizing a city as the end-all be-all of professional theater is inherently problematic and commodified in a way that doesn't make space for the sort of equity most artists want to see? For example, I'm thinking of an interview with Laurence Olivier, who said every American state needed a national theater where the largest population of citizens could be affected by theater and exposed to a wider variety of stories. And I don't see the rest of that question. So with what's there, would you all like to weigh in? And I don't see them.
Yeah, do you see me?
No, I don't see you, but please weigh in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a California-based artist, so I would love to hear our New York artists talk about this, but I'll just say that I do love the idea of looking to the local level to develop our art forms. The regional theater could actually speak about issues in the region, that it's supporting local artists. I think a lot of times, especially on the West Coast, we see a lot of our work go to New York artists, and it's hard to understand the obsession with, I mean, I love the theater that's happened in New York, but I think the question of how can we change the theater landscape so that it is developing the local communities and the local art, and that it's actually speaking to local issues.
I think also that I was just thinking about theater in New York as a New Yorker, and with my experience, good or bad experience in New York. I think also the fact that like Broadway theater, or most of Broadway theater, just excluding Manhattan Theater Club, Roundabout, and Lincoln Center, is all considered what we call commercial theater. It's theater is definitely there to make money. So producers are thinking always, it's like, what are the things that are covered not only at artistic level, but also can bring seats, can bring people to fill those seats, the price. I mean, it's kind of a vicious circle. I was talking to a friend director yesterday, the running costs of a Broadway show are exorbitant and so incredibly high that actually I think after this pause ends, I think there have to be somehow a reckoning and figuring out how restructure somehow Broadway. Having said that, I think when we talk about equity in theater, my point of view is that this equity needs to be not only on stage and off stage in the creative teams, but also in the producing teams. I think like people in charge of institutions, people in charge of producing shows should show the same diversity and equity. So I think, that way we'll be able to find a leveling of this. And like the person asking the question was saying, yes, I think I'm actually shocked that the US doesn't have a national theater like in London or many other places, that is subsidized somehow by the government and is somehow objective and tells stories about the people, because there's always the questioning, like commercial theater, it's up to what the producers decides. And if we have a majority of white producers, they will tell maybe, white stories, but it will be really important. And I think there was many tries to make a national theater. It even was announced a few years ago, it was on the cover of New York Times, and Mel Streep was involved, etc. And it's supposed to happen, and then it never did. But I think will be a very important thing to happen, not only at the national level, but also at state levels, like in big cities all over the country. I think will be very important. I think it will definitely help to change the landscape, like Tanya was saying, the American theater landscape.
Regina, do you have anything you want to add?
Well, I think the rest of the question saying that is Broadway too small of a space to generate the inclusivity we seek, and I think maybe there's so many variables on what is the return on investment that they expect on a weekly basis. Having worked at in an advertising agency for mostly Broadway shows back in the 90s, I remember expectations and needs financially are really high. So the risk taking, the responsibility of telling stories about community and about us, who we are and who we can be. It's hard. It's hard to find. I know it's being challenged now by a particular group of playwrights, and their work is spectacular. And I'm so glad to see it finally in New York in these stages. But maybe it's too specific. The variables are too many and too great. And that we should really focus our initiatives, or theater should perhaps, or producers focus their initiatives in these local organizations, and focus on making immense local impact first. Broadway is it's a big one. It's a big question.
Yeah, and I think that what we don't spend enough time maybe acknowledging as an industry is that there can be, and there is, so much wonderful theater happening with small companies constantly everywhere in the country, with incredibly talented artists involved at every step of the process. And it's like, to a degree, that visibility is correlated with value and quality, right? And that's not the reality. And those companies can make tremendous impacts to the communities that they're working in. And I think it's time that we find a way to lift up all of that work that's happening. It's a really good question. So Richard Bryant has added a question in. What would you say to students who don't become designers but become production artists, programmers, stage managers? How could they raise their representation in those fields? So I will go ahead and weigh in. I think a lot of those jobs are a little bit different than design jobs, in that you generally don't put in an application to get a design job, and some of those technical production jobs, right? They can be advertised nationally, and you have an opportunity to put your name into that realm. So with that being said, I think I just want to highlight that a certain amount of that in terms of increasing representation comes on the employers. It comes on producers, it comes on production managers, and some of it also comes on designers being intentional about advocating, who is the programmer that they would like to work with, and all of that realm. But do any of you have something to add into there?
Yeah, I think I will add too that as designers, as professionals in the theater as well, we can contribute enormously as well, because in this field, it's like any other work. The stepstone system works, and we need to make sure that we're conscious about who do we hire to be our associates and our assistants. The same way that we were given opportunities when we were assistants and associates, we need to make sure that we're conscious of that and hire more diverse, assistants and associates that eventually will be able to, have the opportunities that we had when we were in that situation. There's a lot of things happening right now. I just want to mention one that I'm a part of, which is Equity Through Design. Is a program that was created by a great group of people led by Jane Maskey, a production designer. And it's a group of phenomenal designers that are being assigned, each one a student, a BIPOC student from high school or colleges, in order to mentor them for a whole year. And it's phenomenal because it's giving them, at the moment that they're very young, the opportunity to interact directly with somebody that has achieved a certain level in the professional career. So I think those are the kind of things that we can do in order to help the situation. Besides asking, producers and directors to do it, I think it's important for us to also look at ourselves and see what can I do in order to change this landscape. And I think that's an important thing that we should all do and pay attention to.
Yeah, I'll just say that the thing I love about that question, and also about what Alejo is saying, is that it brings up the point that I think in terms of diversifying theater and changing the landscape of theater, it used to be like, okay, we know we need to play different plays and to change who people are seeing on stage from different communities. And now they're starting the conversation. We know the people that we don't see, the designers, we need to diversify that. And in reality, what should be happening is every person in the theater, the entire building needs to be diverse. Whether that's the producers, the directors, the managers, the technicians, every aspect of the theater should look the way the United States looks. Everything should look the way public transportation looks. I'm from the Bay Area, so it's everything should look like BART. You get on the train and you see the spectrum of the world. I want to walk into a theater and a place that I'm working, and that's what it looks like, and that's that we're all there equally.
It's interesting, Tanya, what you're saying, because that brings us back to that question I think David was asking, you know what I mean? Because in a city that could not be more eclectic and more diverse like New York, mm-hmm. that is not happening in theater. And it's kind of fascinating to see how in the city that should be the one with the most representation, it's not happening.
Yeah, that's a great point. Because it's not about that we don't exist. The people are there, and they're just being excluded.
It has to be. I think also it has to do a little bit with this this pyramid structure, and I feel like Broadway is on the apex and New York's on the apex, and how it's the higher you try to go, the less you see that equity. You see it in regional theaters, you see it in smaller theaters, and as you're going up and up, you don't see it much well represented. So what happens and who's in charge of filtering that?
Mm-hmm.
Very interested too that if we can change that and discover how to really figure out a way to change that system.
I just want to say one quick thing about that, and in terms of the young designers and for young and let's say young theater makers that know that they want to be technicians and managers and not necessarily designers. It is, I think theater in its practices, some of the good practices, is that we still move forward like a small town. So I do appreciate and encourage, and my friend Binky said that there's a window for any young artist where they could do all sorts of things and reach out to all sorts of people before they are called stalkers. And I think it's like age 20 to 30, those 10 years, or of actually young technicians, young scenic artists, crafts people that just want to introduce themselves to theaters and introduce themselves to shops. It is my hope that in this moment where we can reevaluate our own, our responsibility or our, let's say, how we're serving as gatekeepers or not, how we can open those doors to young artists in different ways. Start that internship. Take 3 next fall when you can. Help them develop their tools, facilitate their growth, and encourage their learning in new and varied ways. You don't have to wait for somebody to graduate from a particular school at a particular year with certain number of years of experience to welcome them in your shop or in your theater. Give them an opportunity to show you what they can do for you and how they can really contribute to the life of that theater. They are in your neighborhoods and they want to stay and be part of the family and be part of that town, that small town that is your city, especially when we're talking about theater. So I encourage all young artists to reach out to designers, to technicians, to the electrics office at school where they see themselves participating. Reach out. I think there's something that happened back in the 70s and 60s that somebody could just arrive at a city and say, hey, here's my resume, hire me. I think we're in that moment again. We're local. We want to work. Hire me. Let me practice and grow with you. And I encourage every young artist, designer, technician, and manager to put themselves forth.
So we've got one question in the chat that I want to get to in a minute, but first I want to bring up, the summer has the pause, for lack of a better word, in live performance has allowed some time for people to organize themselves. And Regina, a couple of years ago, I think it was right after I met you at a USITT conference, I got an invitation to a Facebook group that you were managing, that you had created of Latinx designers. And then over this summer, in that group, there was an invite posted by Jorge Arroyo, inviting us to a Zoom invite, to just saying, I think this group of Latinx designers should have time to chat with each other. And out of this, a new group has sort of evolved. And Regina and Tanya, I'd invite both of you to sort of talk about what's come of that, and where that group is now and what the goals are.
Sure. I think it all started back in 2016 when the Facebook page started, and I think it came out of a need of not seeing our issues being discussed at important conferences across the nation. And I think it just became really apparent that we needed to carve a little space for us to connect and also share resources. So it was small. There was only 49 people, and I knew they were concerned about their about the field. They were concerned about the work that they were doing and not having access in the telling of other stories beyond the Latino community. And they wanted to, expand and move to other cities, etc. So it came out of that need. Fast forward to now, I think Jorge Arroyo, amongst other folks, but Jorge was the one that said, let's meet. We kind of found ourselves in a situation where, like, okay, we all know we exist somewhere within this country, but we don't know where we are, what we're doing, what our wants and what our aesthetic concerns are, etc. We should meet because right now we don't have jobs, and there's an opportunity to connect finally and see each other, you know, and talk about what we could do together to prepare for the return of our field. Um, and so that was a really exciting first meeting of about, what was it, Tanya, 20 something people?
Yeah, Alejo was there too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was like 20 to the first round. Yeah.
And then, some of the things that came up were to the group was, first and foremost, it doesn't need to be specifically about designers, because perhaps there could be a space carved out for us to talk to our counterparts in scenic art and all the other shops. It's basically, and also then, of course, it grew to include managers. And so we decided that yes, it should be designers, technicians, and managers, and that kind of prompted all sorts of other questions about the name of the group, whether or not we needed to formalize the network, or whether we needed to be a network or an organization, and it all grew from there. What was your first impression, Alejo, when you joined us that day?
Oh, I was so happy about it because I didn't know, I mean, like it's very easy because like when when you're an immigrant, like in my case, and I didn't have anyone here, I was on my own, what I mean? So I always focus, like how to survive, especially when you're a freelancer. And when I discovered the group, and then when when we formed La Gente and all that, it filled me with joy because, I found so many people that understood me in a way, I mean, that if they had like my same kind of story somehow, and they were Latinos and Latinas and Latinx like me, and I had no idea that there were so many. So I am really pumped about it, and I can't wait till we start again and we kind of promote the group and get get stronger and stronger.
I think at that first session, also other things became very clear that we needed to make sure that we were very transparent in how we stood in solidarity with the movement, and all sort of working groups that have stemmed out of We See You, Black White American Theater, and Black Lives Matter, and all of that. So creating a list, and there was a lot of commonalities in those first couple of meetings of things that we wanted to tackle, that we knew we were going to be stronger together at addressing. Tanya, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say what I love about our La Gente right now is that at the core, we're trying to find ways to support one another. And, we're doing that in different ways. I think there's the part where we're trying to create a place for visibility. And we're also a place to share resources and knowledge, and advocating for our place in the table. So I think that for me, what's beautiful about it is I think a lot of us have had experiences where we felt alone, whether that's being in a program where we're the only Latinx person, or in a theater, or at a design table. And so saying it has a lot to do with even visibility to one another, and saying we're here to support you. We're trying to be very open. Like, we have meetings once a week, and we have a monthly group meeting every third Monday of the month. And so we're trying to create a culture of transparency. And there's a lot of things that we're talking about right now. And I think what's important is that as we're trying to contribute to the national conversation of shifting the paradigm in theater, nothing is a quick solution. And for us, that's been really important to keep having conversations, for people to feel like they can come to the meetings and ask questions and say, this is something I'm experiencing. Are you experiencing it? Okay, I want a working group to talk about that and to find a solution. So I think it's really about creating the place for one another to have those conversations.
Absolutely. So after after much deliberation, we decided that the name of the group was going to be La Gente, as a term of endearment, like we say to each other when we're talking about, when we reached out to one another, like, Gente, have you heard about this? So it kind of stuck. And then we're officially the La Gente, the Latinx Theater Design Network. And it does include designers, technicians, and managers of all ages and at all points in their careers. We certainly have a solid group of students that just joined recently in the last couple of weeks. Welcome if you're here today, and we look forward to our next big launch after the Instagram, which launched on September 15th. Our big launch and what we're working towards is actually a national directory on a website, and that is basically our big task at hand. So we're hoping that will be launched soon.
Great. So we are almost out of time. So I'd like to ask everyone to, in terms of being, Regina, you mentioned the large group of students that just joined, right? So in these current times, what advice would you offer to current students or early career professionals going forward? And I know that's very much a trick question in this moment, which is why I'm trying to crowdsource the answer.
I think for me is use this time to work, to try things out. If you've been avoiding that one particular, okay, I'll be direct about it. You got feedback on your drafting from your professor. No, I'm talking to you. You got drafting feedback. You know that you need time to fix the paint on that last model you made. Take time to make the work that you've done better. If you are someone that needs extra time to learn software, take the time to find your way to learn it. I know I do. Take this time also to reach out to other students at other universities that might be in your same, like I said earlier, you might be stronger together. Share ideas, share your work. Maybe somebody else has also done suit, and you want to share, have that feedback. Practice collaboration and providing feedback to one another that way. I think if your website or your resume, of course, needs help and needs to be better, focus on that as well. But also, I would recommend, like I said earlier, because of the type of work that we do and we're charged with as designers and theater makers, find the time to go out, to draw, to live, to love, to let's say, mind your trauma. It was a big shift. You were yanked in March from your journey, right? Especially if you're in a 4-year program. Mind your trauma. Sleep when you need to sleep. Eat when you need to eat. Take care of yourself.
Tanya.
Yeah, well, I'll say, thinking about students that are in school, my advice is I've seen a lot of students put an enormous amount of pressure on themselves to be a finished product while they're in school. And I think it's important to remember that that's a time in your life when you should be experimenting and you should be excited about developing, and that feedback is, no one expects you to be a finished product when you're in school. So that feedback is generous, and that you shouldn't, I think there's a lot of pressure. And then for people who have graduated, I would say a similar thing in that I think as artists, it's our journey is our entire lives, and as we grow and what our voice is everything we've experienced, and that I think it's really important for all artists to really value the experiences they went through. And I think sometimes we're told that the experiences we have aren't as important as experiences other people have had because of what's put on stage. So I think the best way for us to find our voices is to really value who we are and whatever it is that made us.
Alejo.
Well, to everything that Tanya and Regina say so eloquently, I think I would just add the fact that the learning process never ends. So you need to be always proactive, and you need to always keep studying and keep trying to, like perfect and better yourself. And you have to learn that once you graduate and you become a professional, you have to learn how to differentiate your work than your career. Your work is what you do, what you thrive for excellence all the time, whether it's tangible, if you sets or costumes or props, or intangible, if you do lights or sounds, but that's your work. And your career is all that comes with it: accolades, good reviews, awards, etc. Make sure that you put all that focus in your work and you focus on your path. It's very, 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 very hard to stay focused on that path, because you always try to look right and left and see, the shows you didn't get, the projects that you didn't fall in your lap. But just focus on your journey and be proactive and try to always excel yourself. And you know what? Most importantly, have fun along the way. Have fun. It's really important. I mean, this is a labor of love, what we do, and enjoying it. It's so rewarding. So just have fun along the way.
All right. And sorry, Regina, did you want to weigh in? No? Okay. So with that, our time is at an end. So I wanted to thank everyone. Thank all of the panelists for joining us and being willing to share so honestly and generously of your perspectives. And I'd like to thank everyone that attended. Community Conversations is one of the things that are supported by USITT's Tanisha Jefferson Fund for Inclusion. If you would like to support this work and other initiatives by USITT, please visit usitt.org/donate to help us continue our outreach. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you very much.